when I talk to some Catholics, I get the impression they would say I am not a Christian because I have not received the Eucharist from a church that properly places the priestly blessing on the Eucharist, and I have never consumed the actual body and blood of Christ. There are other Catholics I talk to who I think would call me a brother and a Christian. What is just the actual right position? What is the actual Catholic position on me?
Yeah, the actual Catholic position, according to the official teaching at the Second Vatican Council, would be that.
Hey, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour, and when I was a boy, my mom said that if I wanted to learn things about things, I should ask questions of people who know what they're talking about. And so since I'm a Protestant who wants to learn more things about what Catholics actually think, I started by going to the Cathedral of the Madeleine in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is a place where there are Catholics. And I talked to the Catholic priest there, and I was like, hey, I'm a Protestant. Can you show me around and tell me about your stuff? And he did, and it was really nice, and I learned a lot of things. I feel like I made a friend. And I was like, I'd like to know more. And so I asked my theology professor buddy, Jeremy Holmes, if we could sit down over a long meal that I don't know if we actually ever ate our food, but theoretically it was a long meal, to talk shop and ask questions and bounce things back and forth. And that conversation has been a little bit different than the one where I went and just asked questions of a priest at a cathedral, because here I know Jeremy, and so I felt like we could do a little more give and take. And I thought we could get deeper into it if I'm throwing out some stuff that I think as well. Now look, if you're here and you're like, oh, cool, Catholics and Protestants cannibalizing each other. I love religious debates. You are going to be so disappointed because we don't really fight at all. It's incredibly boring and nice. It's not boring, it's just nice. And that's because we really do like each other. And I really do think that there's a ton of overlap in terms of what we think. But part of what I like about Jeremy is that he's not weirded out by going right at the stuff that really is, or really are, rather, the points of distinction between our two traditions. So last time around, I left it on this gigantic cliffhanger, and as promised, we're going to pick it up exactly where we left off with an uncomfortable question and see what Jeremy does with it. So once again, my name is Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. My buddy's Jeremy Holmes, and let's talk about Protestantism and Catholicism.
If somebody's outside looking in, they're like, should I be Greek Orthodox or should I be Catholic?
Yeah.
What would be the rationale for why they should fall on your side of that schism?
I think that one key thing is to maybe clarify the Catholic idea of what the importance of Rome is, and how it is important and how it's not important. And that is something that is bound up with this history that you're telling. That is the big deal in the minds of the early church, as I understand it, was the apostles. Now, Peter was sort of the lead voice in that group, but there was no thought that Peter was a kind of lone monarch with the other 11 apostles as his employees or something, right? But it's in Catholic circles refer to the College of Apostles, right? The Apostolic College, which has a lead guy, kind of a head of the college, but he's not a solo ruler. He's only a ruler in as much as he's the head of this college. It's the apostles who are the rulers of the church. And so then they head off and do their things. And what becomes very important to early Christians is, what did the apostles do? So Peter dying in Rome has its parallel in other places where there are other apostolic sees, other churches that are associated with this or that apostle.
And you would call those apostolic sees as well.
Yep.
So traditionally you guys have Thomas dying in India. I know some people disagree about where he winds up.
Yeah.
We've got Matthew in North Central Africa. Does he die in what we'd call Sudan or something like that? Ethiopia?
I don't recall. But
I'm not sure either. John in Asia Minor.
Then the question becomes, which of those places sort of remain in the consciousness of the church as we remember this apostle as associated with this place, and this, and as Rome is associated with Peter, so this place is associated with this apostle. If that remains in the consciousness, then people look to that church as having relatively more importance than other churches. You'll find, for example, when St. Augustine is on Christian doctrine is offering advice to people who want to know, well, which books are in the Bible? Because at that point there's no super codified list. You can't go to the bookstore and get it off the shelf yet. He says, well, in a pinch, use the books that the most important churches use, right? So he's in his mind, not all churches are equal. And what's making them unequal is some of them are more associated with an apostle. Now, what that would mean is that the kind of first among equals relationship that Peter had to the flesh and blood apostles as they walked around with Jesus then has its reflection in the various communities they founded, where there are various churches that would be seen as rulers, places of the prince, and Rome would be sort of the most important, but not the only important one, not the only authority, maybe the biggest authority, but historically then what happens is that other apostolic sees get wiped out. Right, the Muslims come through and destroy this place. This place.
A long ways after the fact at that point, but yeah,
sure. So some good ways down the road, the landscape looks really different, and you don't have the same sort of gentle slopes up to the peak of Rome. You've got Rome standing a lot more alone than she used to be. In terms of,
I think when
in
you
terms
get
of
to
any
that,
see that can trace itself back to an apostle.
Okay.
And so I think at that point you'd say that first among equals thing gets more and more emphasis as that aloneness becomes more of a reality. And then of course, if there comes a moment where maybe some other of the equals want to test that firstness, then of course that will also lead to either accentuation or downplaying, depending on how that breaks, right? So I think there is a long history to the idea people have in their minds today of the Pope as a kind of monarchical figure who solo rules the Catholic Church.
Well, and there are popes who conducted themselves like that.
Oh yeah,
and
for sure.
It got crazy. But I mean, I could put in front of you the commentary on Job by, who was that?
Gregory?
Gregory. It was Gregory. We read that in seminary. I remember thinking, like, if this was one of those like Folger's blind taste test things, like, does that sound Christian? Every Protestant I know would be like, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
And, or maybe mild pushback here and there, just adjusted for how long ago that was and slightly different language. I think one of the unfortunate consequences of the Reformation is that as humans, we tend to think in terms of binary 1, 0, yes, no, good, bad, right, wrong. And because there are popes who were complete dumpster fires as human beings, disgraced the office horribly, disgraced the name of Christ. I mean, it was hideous. It's really easy to be like, well, all the popes did stuff like what happened in the Vatican that one time before the Reformation. And it's just not true. It's just not true. I mean, you look at the Cadaver Synod with Sylvester and the two feuding rich families. Well, if that's all you know about the papacy, this thing's a joke.
Yeah.
And we look at you guys and we're like, you guys talk about this, important tradition and how it's all good, but we've heard these 3 anecdotes about stupid stuff you guys did, and it's broken. It's insane. But at the same time, I can understand how if a Catholic looks at embezzlement scandals at some mega church, they look at, this or that scoundrel that does the whole la-di-da, I'm an evangelical Christian routine. I could see how a Catholic would look at it and say, well, that's probably how all your things are.
Yeah.
But when you actually look at the record of history, I think this is what you see. Overwhelmingly, the Catholic Church has put forward popes who think theologically, and you've got a really impressive percentage of not just theological thinkers, but dudes who wrote and processed ideas. And I think that we deprive ourselves by just washing our hands of everyone who's ever held that title because of the abuses of some.
And you might say that this is one of the hazards of having an actual concrete individual visible foundation that you say is founded by Jesus Christ, because concrete individual visible communities are going to have these dumpster fires.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And I'm guessing you and I have both been a part of one or two.
And if you don't have this commitment that Catholics have, then you can kind of become a free agent again and then reassociate somewhere else, and you're clean of that dumpster. That was them. I was there, but that wasn't me. This is now my congregation over here. If you're a Catholic, you just go, yeah, that was us.
Yeah, so
And then you
just
did,
for example, I
right?
feel no ownership of the Salem witch trials.
Right.
I'm not a Calvinist. They were. I'm mostly a Calvinist. I mean, I overwhelmingly agree, but that's not my tradition. It's a different part of the family tree, so it's very easy. Well, and not only that, but I'm also not a statist.
Okay.
So it's double easy for
Yeah.
me to be like, I don't want the government killing anybody. So you got a
Yeah.
government killing people, and it's backed by the church, and 19 people, I think that's the number, end up dying in that situation. It has never once in my life crossed my mind that my ideology or me personally bear any historical responsibility for the Salem witch trials.
Right.
Michael Servetus gets burned at the stake in Geneva. Well, I've never felt 1 ounce of that.
Yeah.
I mean, my tradition, in its immediate sense, extends to 1950 with some Scandinavians who migrated to Missouri.
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
I think what you just said is so important for people from my tribe to understand that it really is, we have a very convenient out on everything.
Okay.
And that's got to look funny to a Catholic or an Orthodox, because we do just have the historical convenience of just washing our hands. And you know what? If my group gets stupid now, and we're gonna like burn somebody at the stake or something, which I don't think we're gonna do, of course I'm gonna walk away.
Yeah. It's a lot like being in a natural family where, you know, if Uncle Louie is a drunkard and a jerk, unfortunately he's still Uncle Louie, and there's no making him not related anymore. And being Catholic can be like that sometimes, right? Where you say that you just want to tell people, look, that doesn't represent what we're about, but they're like, but he was Pope? Yeah.
Yeah, that happened. But he
That
did take
happened.
a skeleton that was rotting and put it on the
He
throne.
did that. He in
for,
fact did that. That went down.
That happened at St. John's Lateran.
But the positive side you're pointing out is, yeah, I read St. Athanasius or St. Gregory, and I have that sense of the flip side. Oh, here's somebody from my community talking to me over the centuries.
I think everyone, once again, is very selective in what they do with the church fathers because it's such a big body of writing. And these guys were not a finished product. And clearly, these folks were wrestling. I mean, Tertullian ended up a Montanist at the end of his life for a while,
They're
didn't
still
he?
thinking it out. Yeah.
Yeah, they're gaming it out together, and they're in this dynamic moment where they weren't calcified yet. And that's what I think is so neat, and it's why I don't want to feel like a guest in that crowd. That's something that I want to overcome with my Protestantism, because I love reading the church fathers and getting a sense of what that verbal tennis match was about and what they were trying to wrestle through. I think the Didache is an early example of the church wrestling that through. I think where we hurt ourselves is when we pick the ones we like and the phrases we like, and we try to present that as being indicative of all this stuff. I mean, my Lutheran friends could make a case for all the church fathers thought everything they think. And they're half right. It's fun to get to snipe from the secure position of Protestantism where we can just move on. But the reality is that I do view this as a shared tradition. I do view Catholics pre and post 1517 as my brothers and sisters because of exactly what we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah.
Now, this is who Jesus is.
Right.
This is what the problem was. This is what Jesus did. And, and in some way, we respond. And so, I don't know, with your permission, I'd love to continue to effort to feel less like a guest in that part of the world and more like a part of the same. When I talk to some Catholics, I get the impression they would say I am not a Christian because I have not received the Eucharist from a church that properly places the priestly blessing on the Eucharist, and I have never consumed the actual body and blood of Christ. There are other Catholics I talk to who I think would call me a brother and a Christian. What is just the actual right position? What is the actual Catholic position on me?
Right. Yeah. So, the actual Catholic position, according to, the official teaching at the Second Vatican Council, would be that that you are a Christian and a brother in Christ, and obviously, from the Catholic point of view, you've got some things wrong, and you're in a weird position due to a long history.
Okay.
All right. So the people who, at the Reformation, broke away from that visible congregation that I keep going back to, In a Catholic viewpoint, you would say, yeah, of course there were reasons to do that. Uncle Louis was terrible.
But you guys see some of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
this is part of what I actually kind of like about the Council of Trent is that they are able to say, boy, have we been blowing it. We have to get our act together. Yeah, there's a lot of internal house cleaning we have to do, but we can't just spend our time firing at the outside, right? So the fault is not that people thought something was wrong. From a Catholic point of view, the fault would have been, yeah, but you still can't tear away from the visible community. There's got to be another way to work this out, right? As painful as it is to stay in, somehow we have to do that. And so, legitimately, from a Catholic perspective, you would say the people who actually did that were being unfaithful to Christ. They were not following his intention, and many of them surely must have been in some kind of state corresponding to that fact. But once they're away, and then they have children, and their children have children, and those children have children, and we're now some hundreds of years later, nobody today in one of the various Protestant denominations is in the position of tearing away from the visible union, right? They're just in the position of being what they've been. And so there you could say, well, it's not on you that your church is separated from the Catholic Church. You don't have a kind of personal guilt about that. It's something that we're all bearing, almost like original sin, right? Which is not a personal fault, right? And so you'd say, yeah, there was a bad deed in the background that explains where you are, but it's not your bad deed.
That's a position of political, social, religious grace, and I appreciate it. What's funny about it is if I am not sitting across from a Catholic and I've got all of my, super bearded craft beer wielding Calvinist buddies hanging around the table and they're talking about what happened there.
Yeah.
I think most of them would take the same gracious tone. Now, believe me, I know Protestants who don't.
Sure.
You guys are the Antichrist, all caps, literally Hitler. I don't know what they'd say, but
I
it wouldn't be nice.
I remember the Jack Chick.
Oh, yeah.
Cartoons,
somebody gave me the entire stack. I have every single one of those.
Wow.
I wrapped in cellophane in my
a collector's
office.
item.
I haven't had a chance
goodness.
to read them, but I'm pretty sure I'm bad because of my blue jeans. I don't know.
Okay.
I'll try to make a change. I get that there are Catholics who are super, super mad at me. I hear from them on the internet, and they say really mean things.
Yeah.
And they think that by yelling at me to come home and telling me that I'm not a Christian, that somehow this will accomplish something. And that's just, it's repellent. It's not moving the needle at all.
Yep.
But boy, am I aware, on the Protestant side of things, there are people who would say all the same stuff the opposite way.
Sure.
That's what's going to stick in our ears, and that's what we're going to remember.
Right.
Because loud, angry people at the end of any distribution curve tend to be the people we actually hear from. Yeah. Whereas the healthy, normal people in the big bell part of the curve, you don't remember what they said because it sounded sane, like what you just said. We both agree on the creeds.
Yeah.
We both agree on what we're going for.
Yeah.
Key points of disagreement, and you and I both know them. We disagree about where Scripture ranks versus tradition. We would disagree about how exactly that initiation point of faith occurs and what role the church plays in it. We would disagree about some of the extended sacraments and whether that is actually an efficacious impartation of grace, or if this is an ordinance of the church and this is us being involved in life and pointing people to Jesus. We would disagree about purgatory. We would disagree about Mary. But in the grand scheme of things, maybe only one or two of those has a ton of weight. We would look and say, a necessary break occurred. The church was a dumpster fire. There were opportunities to get this straightened out. We devolved away from the biblical teachings on salvation, the role of the church. It got bloody with the church taking over government for huge swaths of the Middle Ages. The Protestant would look at that and say, we tried. John Huss showed up at a council under promise of protection, and he didn't leave alive. There were efforts and blood was shed. And I totally get the other argument. And that's what I think a lot of my Catholic friends don't understand, is I totally get it. I hear you. This is Christ's visible church. headquarters happened to be in Rome. Could have been anywhere. That's where it happened to turn out to be. And Uncle Louis was having an awful stretch. That's when he was kind of on the booze and it wasn't his best day. I use the same language. I don't think Catholicism's an eternal historical dumpster fire. I think you talk about the Reformation, you're talking about catching the church on its worst day. Some folks would look at that and say, salvation can only come through this organization in this spot. This is the only true church. I think other people are just going to be wired to look at that and say, well, no, you try to reform it, and if it doesn't work, you don't just quit on the gospel. You go do this other thing. So Protestants would look in and be like, yeah, Trent only happens because of us.
Yeah.
Like, if it's not us, there's no Trent. We think Trent was cool too.
I think that one of the problems we get often in Catholic Protestant conversations is picking out an issue, then duking it out over this issue, when really the deciding factor is not so much this argument or this text on this side. It's how does it fit into the whole picture that you're working with right now?
Yes.
And you could say, we can call it my assumptions, you have your assumptions, but it's that whole set of thoughts and where this fits into the grand scheme that is going to be the strongest argument for how should I think about this. But what that means is that it's really hard to have the conversation because we can't talk about the whole picture all at once, all the time. Right. We actually have to go from topic to topic.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need any of your fish and chips if you do. Yeah.
So,
makes no progress.
we would say sacraments, right? At some point, you just have to start talking about sacraments. You can't keep talking about the big picture at all times. Humanly speaking, it's going to be difficult to have the conversation just because to see why are we disagreeing about sacraments, you have to not only see, well, you have these 5 Bible verses, I have these 3 Bible verses, but we have to see, I have these 500 assumptions, you have those 400 assumptions, and they all play together, and oftentimes the becoming convinced of the other side of an argument is not so much succumbing to a text or realizing that eventually that you have to cope with this text. That can play a role. More often it's a flip of how you imagine. You were imagining one way and then suddenly the picture flipped on you and you were seeing it another way and you go, oh my goodness, that makes more sense.
When I talk to Protestants who I know, who I was friends with when they were Protestants and now they're Catholics, that is what happened. It's not that somebody was like, look at this verse. Jesus said, this is my body, and is in caps. And they're like, what could he have possibly meant?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it's obviously a metaphor. It's not even, like, really? You guys think the natural reading of that passage is that he was holding bread and was like, that is me? And he used metaphors in all of his teaching. Why is that the one metaphor? Like, don't get me wrong. I understand your case, and it's much more compelling when you go back to the level of assumptions. Instead of repeatedly typing that verse in all caps in the comment section, I look from where I sit and my set of 500 assumptions, there's just no reason to read that as being literal or efficacious. Obviously, that's a metaphor, and he's saying, like, remember this thing, because what's about to happen is, like, I am the centerpiece of everything that's going down, on which we agree. We just disagree about how to read the passage.
Combox offenders. Let me just note. I
might borrow that.
Let me just note that Catholics, especially Catholics who deal with the sort of jack chick zone, get beat over the head a lot with you have to read the Bible literally. So when the Catholic does get to that one spot where he can read it literally.
Yeah, how about
that? Then he
that?
starts jumping up and down and saying, hey, I'm reading it literally and you're not. How about that?
How about that? I've never thought of that.
It's a little bit of one-upmanship.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to say it's good. I'm just saying, maybe cut up some slack. They probably had one too many conversations with somebody who kept taunting them with how I read the Bible literally.
And forgive me if it didn't sound like I'm cutting them slack. I intend to.
Oh, for
That's
sure.
how I mean for it to come
I understand.
off.
Right.
And so my larger point is my Protestant/evangelical low church crowd, they got 500 assumptions when they come to a passage about the Eucharist, John 6, whatever it might be. And yet, so do you guys. and yet we can still both say the creeds. And so you go to John 17, you get into Jesus praying for future believers, and you know what he prayed for, be one.
Right.
As he and the Father are one, so people would know that the Son was sent by the Father, and this is a witness to the world how we interact. But here's where I'm at, man. We still can say the same creed. We still get on from that stuff, and we're not burning each other down right now, and we haven't been for a long time. And so, I don't know, I'm interested in your thought on this, but I'm make a bold statement.
Okay.
I think we're actually doing better on that John 17 thing than we're giving ourselves credit for.
Okay.
I think it's been ugly, but I think it's a testimony to the reality and truth of the gospel that you still have so many people inside the circle of historical Christianity who really can't agree on that stuff you were saying at the beginning about who God is, who Jesus is, what happened on the cross, and where we fit. Do you think I'm being too optimistic?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, I'm going to do that to you again. No, I'm sorry. No, why am I saying I'm sorry? I'm not sorry at all. That's the stupid thing to apologize for. I obviously had all the time in the world to make an editorial decision and decide to hit pause right there, but I wanted the cliffhanger, and I'm putting it there for a reason, and that's because I want you to kick this around with me. Like, is the church in a state of disunified disarray? It's been a wreck for decades or hundreds of years or whatever. Or is the church in a little bit greater state of unity than a lot of people give it credit for? Now, look, you just saw the conversation. You know what I'm going to argue for, and it's the unpopular position, but it's the one that says, maybe this is going better than we think. When you actually sit down and start comparing notes with people of different Christian expressions, you discover, well, man, there is a whole lot of agreement on God and who Jesus is and the idea of redemption and the gist of what happened at the cross and most of how you interpret the Bible. And then, like Jeremy very astutely pointed out, what you have that really is the distinction between any two groups of Christian thought, and this applies whether you're talking Protestants, Catholics, or you're talking about, the one group and the Coptic Christians. I'm doing a video with them coming up, the Eastern Orthodox Church, other expressions. When you compare any of these groups, you discover that there are a set of assumptions in the background. And those sets of assumptions determine what you make of the Bible, what authority you ascribe to the Bible, how you interpret the trickier parts of the Bible. There are some of these interpretations that Father Diaz at the Cathedral of the Madeleine threw out and that Jeremy's throwing out, where they're just like, yeah, obviously the text means this. And I'm going, what? You seem so sane. How could it possibly mean that? Why would that be the conclusion you would jump to? But they're not crazy people and they're not bad people. So what's going on? If they're not crazy and they're not bad, then it must be what Jeremy's saying. They have a set of assumptions that cause them to come to the text and read it a certain way. I have a set of assumptions. I happen to think they're a very good set of assumptions, or I wouldn't think them anymore because I don't want to think things that are dumb and wrong. But I think what we get into in the next couple rounds of the conversation with Jeremy as it moves forward is we do get in a little bit deeper to what those core assumptions are. And I already mentioned a couple of them, the Bible, but particularly the church. What role does the church play? My Protestant assumptions say, I don't need to go to your church. And if things were as weird as we both acknowledge they were at a certain point in the 16th century, and it was more than just like 1 year, it was a bad stretch. If things were that bad, well, Jeremy's assumptions say you can't just leave. That's like your uncle. And sometimes he does weird stuff. You can't just leave your family. Whereas I'm like, well, my loyalty is not really like to one expression of the institution. The church is everybody. It's everybody who's a Christian. So I didn't leave. I didn't leave at all. I just, my tribe just didn't want to play ball with what was going on there. We felt like it was getting in the way of what the actual point is. So that's why you'll hear some Protestants argue like, no, we didn't leave. Like, that was kind of you guys. Now, look, I'm not trying to pick a fight with anybody who sees this in any given way. What I'm trying to do is very candidly and very honestly, understanding fully that every one of those remarks is going to get me blown up in one way or another in terms of the comment section. And I get it. I'm cool with it. We can just do that. That's fine. What I'm trying to do is to illustrate assumptions about the nature of the church in general, the nature of the Bible in general, that would cause one thing to be unthinkable to one group of Christians, and the same equation causes another group to be like, well, no, obviously we should do the thing you think is unthinkable. And guess what? I'm relatively sure that I am pretty in on the whole Christianity thing. I think I'm pretty in on the whole Jesus thing. I think I'm committed to this at this point, and I suspect that Jeremy is exactly the same way. So what gives? Well, I think what gives is exactly what he pointed out, and that is these different sets of assumptions. So for now, we're going to leave it at this. Question for you to wrestle with: is the church in a state of disastrous disunity? Is the church in a better state of unity than we often give it credit for, somewhere in between? I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. I'll try to read everything, and if I don't reply to everybody, I try to catch all of that because I really do care what you think, even when what you think is that I'm a great big idiot and that I'm wrong about stuff. I can live with that. We can have fun disagreeing about things. That's cool. So we'll think about that, and next time around, we'll get deeper into these sets of assumptions that Jeremy's referencing and try to sort those out a little bit. And at the least, maybe everybody comes away understanding each other a little bit, and that sounds pretty good to me. There are two reasons that we're getting to do things like this together. One is because I keep finding awesome people of goodwill who are comfortable in their own skin, who are gracious, who are okay with unpacking ideas and spreading them out on the table and thinking about it together. And I can't thank those people enough, Jeremy and everybody else I've met with in this series of videos. The second reason is because some of you are really behind it and you're actually funding that thing. And so the way we do that is at patreon.com/TMBH. A handful of you have signed up to support the program, and it really just makes all the difference in the world. So I cannot say thanks enough to the people who are willing to go on camera with me and to the people who make it possible for me to afford to be able to do stuff like this. So thanks a ton to everybody. Thanks to you for watching and hanging around. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it gives you something to talk about, think about, maybe both. And we'll see you on the other side with the next one. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. Let's do it again soon.